of Cultivate. I am so glad that you're joining us today for another conversation, whatever it is that you're watching from. I hope that you're having a great, incredible day, and I'm excited for today's episode. I have a special guest with me today, and she is just the sweetest person you'll ever meet. She's an encourager, and I've been able to know her for a few years now, work together with her, and we have an interesting topic to be talking about today. We're actually going to be talking about the reality of the spiritual world, which, creepy. Ooh. But I'm excited to have Danny joining us today for this episode. Thank you for being with us, Danny.
I'm happy to be here. It's a good topic.
Yes. So Danny and I always try to rephrase or think about how I'm going to say this so it doesn't sound weird. Because you and I have these conversations anytime that we gather and, we're hanging out, we end up talking about this topic.
Yeah.
Because we like this topic, but we don't like it, but we like it.
It's just very real. It's a real topic.
Right. And it's very, for us, in different ways, even though we didn't have the same type of experience or upbringing, we find some similarities in our lives when it comes to this. And I just wanted to talk to you today about your experience when it comes to this topic. I feel like so many times, especially when we know Jesus, we might think that, or we might become used to just knowing God and a relationship with God, or maybe you're new to faith. And sometimes we can take the spiritual world lightly and we think okay, Jesus, God, but we don't often think of what it really means for there to be a spiritual world. Like, the enemy's real, the devil's real. There's such things as angels and a spiritual world that's happening as well. It's not just a physical world.
Absolutely.
And so it reminded me of just hearing your story a little bit and how you grew up. And I wanted to just have a conversation with you to hear about your experience when it came to that. You grew up in a home where you had a father who was a santero.
Yeah.
Which, if you're not from Miami, it's like
witchcraft. It's basically witchcraft.
It's what it is.
It's supposed to be I guess the good version of witchcraft, but it's witchcraft.
Yeah. And it's known as a religion. It is a religion.
Yeah.
And we were talking about, you have a background, you grew up Catholic. So did I, but our experience with Catholicism was very different because mine was just, the church, Jesus, Virgin Mary, whatever.
Yours was nice.
For you was something else.
Yeah. It was mixed in with the Santeria. And so it was very for me growing up, especially because the only real experience of religion mostly was with whatever my dad kind of did and the experiences that he kind of lived through and stuff, because my mom's side of the family was Catholic, but it was a very different kind of Catholic in the sense that I think in total growing up, if we went to Catholic church twice, that was probably a lot, you know? I remember we would do what we would call the whole esperar el santo or whatever, which was every saint would have a specific day. And on that day, I remember we would go to my grandma's house and she would have a little, almost altar up with little candles and stuff. And everybody would go and light the candle for the santo. And I wouldn't know what we were doing, but I would just go light the candle for the santo or whatever. But that was basically as far as Catholicism as we got to. Mm-hmm. Again, I remember we would go to church maybe once or twice or maybe 3 times max, but it was such a weird feeling. I don't remember going into the church and experiencing wow, this is God. I remember it feeling like dark and dirty, or I think we would also go sometimes because of whatever my dad was practicing and stuff, but it wasn't a great feeling, and that was through my mom. So again, there wasn't a huge religious aspect coming from them, or a religious pull coming from them. I never did communion. I never did any of that. Yeah. But through my dad, he was probably the one that practiced the most religious stuff.
And you were telling me that you knew this was your dad's or what he did, but you didn't really fully know what he did in when it came to rituals and things like that.
Yeah.
But when you started telling me that story of your life and how you lived those years, you mentioned how for you, even though you didn't know the fullness of what he was doing or what exactly he was doing, you did feel the reality of a spiritual world.
Yeah.
In the sense of like, you mentioned to me like that darkness that you did experience that even at a young age.
Yeah. I didn't understand it. Now, obviously, as a Christian and as an adult, I have more comprehension of it. But growing up, I just remember there feeling a lot of darkness in our lives, like in our house. I kind of mentioned to you earlier, but I was clinically depressed. I was diagnosed by a guidance counselor at school at like 12 that I had clinical depression. And again, like it was just like a lot of darkness, a lot of like sadness in our lives. My mom also had a lot of that. It maybe also stemmed from the fact that, like growing up because of maybe the religion my dad was a part of, and he's like your typical Cuban. There was a lot of arguing, there was a lot of yelling, there was a lot of, emotional turbulence in our household. And he would also be away for a really long time. Like he was a truck driver that, traveled throughout the whole United States. So he would be gone for like a week, 2 weeks, and it was just me and my mom at home. Yeah. And again, you just feel that heaviness. You would just feel a lot of that darkness. And, I didn't understand where it was coming from. And I didn't see a lot of the rituals that my dad would do, but I could feel it. Yeah. I would see the little altar. I would sometimes, like if I was sick, I was a really like sick kid growing up. Sometimes they would have me stand in front of the altar and do like what was a cleansing ritual with like the agua de violetas, which is like like a little kid cologne or whatever. And you would like do the whole cleansing thing. You would throw it at the altar, and that was supposed to like cleanse you. I remember they washed me with like rose water once also because I was like super sick. So like there were those little things where it's like I would experience it, and I was almost like tied into it without fully being like involved.
Right, by choice.
Yeah, like I wasn't like, they wouldn't make me a santo or whatever.
And now that you say those things, this is one of the reasons we were talking about this, because we were saying how it's interesting how humanity, how we are, right? We can often say, oh, I won't go to church because I don't want to be there every weekend. And, I believe in God, but you believe in your own way. And you feel like when we're in a church setting and we talk to people about praying, the importance of praying, the importance of reading your Bible, the importance of being in community, some people feel like, oh, but that's too much. Like you're asking too much of me. Oh, I don't know if I can do this. Yet that same person would easily now follow all these rituals, would easily be involved in all these things. And so we see the difference where God gives you freely, and God offers his love, his grace, his mercy freely to us. Yeah. Not asking really of anything in return other than, our worship, our faithfulness. But yet, people so easily accept and get involved with things that actually demand something from you. And you were telling me how that felt for you and your dad, that it was almost this thing where you're
like fear-based.
It's fear-based. You have to do this in order to be okay. You have to. And it's just giving. Yeah. So how was your experience when it came to that?
Yeah. It was definitely fear-based. And I think the interesting thing that you mentioned is like everything that you would do would basically have like a takeaway. It was never freely given to you. So you're doing a ritual, and you're doing something for a specific purpose. You want to be in a relationship, you want, an outcome, you want more money, whatever the case is. But everything that you're doing comes with a cost, right? And I think that's where a lot of that fear came in. And growing up, there was a lot of that fear in our household. We felt that darkness, again, not understanding that it was necessarily oppression, but that's exactly what it was. Now you can see it. But it comes from that. It's stemming from the fact that you're pouring into something from fear that's causing you to be in fear, that later on, like once he finally became Christian, I at least experienced it like tenfold. What we were experiencing in that oppression beforehand, it's like it exploded once we finally like moved forward in our relationship with God or whatever. It like exploded. It was like, oh, you're not going to? I'm going to try and like pull you at everything that I can in that moment. And it's like, oh, this is real. This is really real, But I think that's the crazy thing about it. Like there isn't peace that comes with it. There isn't good that comes with it. If anything, maybe it stems from selfishness, because everything that you're asking for maybe comes from a place of, I need this, I need that. And
it makes me think nowadays what's very popular in our world today, it's, your zodiac and manifesting this and crystals for this. And it's things that might seem innocent.
Yeah.
They might seem like, well, it's just a crystal. It's just this. But we fail to realize what's connected to that.
Yeah.
And is that humanity is constantly trying to put their faith on something. And we just so easily choose to go every other direction but God. And to me, that just brings me to, again, think about the reality of the spiritual world. It is good and evil. It is God and the enemy working to get your attention, your soul. And so now, especially a young generation, is I'm going to manifest this and I'm going to manifest this and that.
And that's powerful. It's crazy.
And I get the premise of it, of like, you want to speak life into things. The Bible talks about it. It talks about, the power of life and death, being in our tongue and what we talk about in our confession. But it's a different type of confession because it's rooted in God. It's rooted in the word of God. It's rooted in the promises of God. It's rooted in the knowledge of God. Meanwhile, this is rooted in what I want, where I want, putting my faith on a thing rather than on God, the creator. Exactly. And so we have to be so careful in how we allow the world, social media, influencers, famous people to tell us. So even the thought of people, Christians, speaking that way, it's almost like scary. Like, guys, you can't mix both because it doesn't matter how much you want to marry them, they don't go together. Yeah. And I am a firm believer that the enemy will try to use the giftings that God has put in your life and turn them into something else. Yep. And we've talked about this. You are someone who you are very sensitive to the Spirit of God, or to the spiritual world. Yeah. And so am I. And we've talked about in conversations, and we'll talk about it now a little bit more, how because that is something God has placed in our lives, the enemy will try to tap into that and confuse us and try to use it for things that are not. And so for you, since you have that sensitivity towards the Spirit of God, how did you think that the enemy tried to use that for something else? When you were talking to me about your dad finally searching for something else. Yeah. And at the same time, you were like also in search of something.
Which is the crazy thing, because I was thinking about it and I remember feeling this huge pull. Like I turned like 12, 13, and suddenly I was just feeling like a pull to like, but I didn't understand it as God. Mm-hmm. Like I understood it as like, I think I want to be a part of whatever my dad's doing.
A pull, like what do you mean?
Like a pull, like I was just like pulled to it. Like I was like curious about it. And I felt like what my dad was doing. And again, I had he never involved me in any of like the crazy rituals. Like if he did any like chicken killings or something, I was never involved. I never saw it. He always like hid that from me. And maybe that was part of the curiosity. Like I never experienced that side of it. So it seemed mysterious and like interesting, but I also just had like this really big pull. And I remember having a conversation with my mom, or I would mention to her in passing, like, I think I want my dad to start like looping me in. Like, I think I want to start getting involved with this. And the crazy thing about it is that like every little open door that we have, even though it seems small. Like you were saying, it isn't. And even though it seems like it's not that big a deal, or it's only going to affect me, it doesn't. It affects a lot of other people that are in our household even, and in our lives. And for me, once he finally decided to like accept Jesus, it was random. He just started having like a feeling like he needed something else.
Because what he was doing wasn't enough. It wasn't satisfying.
Yeah, he just felt like he started seeking.
So he goes into it thinking, this is the one thing that's going to give me what I need. And you have to do all these things only to find out but it isn't. It wasn't enough.
It's not as pretty as it seems. And so he just started feeling like an itch for something else. I remember I had like a Jewish friend at the time, and he was asking
Did you ever get involved in it? Or
no?
Because that was the
not
thing.
To that point. Literally, like I started feeling like I wanted to start getting involved. And in that same moment, my dad started feeling like I need to get out of this.
Wow.
And again, like it just happened like by God.
Yeah.
And one day he was again like just researching different religions, trying to see like what he could find that would, I guess, fulfill him, in that spiritual, because my dad is super spiritual. He's always been super spiritual. And it's like you were saying, like when you have a gift, the devil's going to try and manipulate it for what he needs. And one day he was at work. My mom and I were in Orlando. We were like on vacation or whatever. And he was supposed to meet us up there. And, a pastor met up with him, like just casually, like at work. And he basically like spoke to him about God and Jesus. And he did like the whole salvation prayer. My dad accepted God in that moment. He accepted Jesus in that moment. And we, again, had no idea. My mom and I were in Orlando with our family, whatever, like in the pool or something. And that day he went home right after. And the garbage usually arrives like super early in the morning or whatever. That day it arrived super late. And he was able to, like, he basically got home and he was able to grab his entire altar, all of the stuff that he did with the rituals, all of that stuff. And he threw it all away. Like he basically just threw it all away. He's like, I want nothing to do with this. And my mom and I had no idea. He went up to Orlando. I think like we did our vacation thing and that was it. That's where it kind of like, you know.
But you said after this, so now your dad starts on this journey. He starts bringing you guys in. You guys end up going to church but then now you start experiencing certain things.
Yeah.
And we were talking about the reality of how our actions, sometimes we think, well, I'm the one that's doing this.
Yeah.
And so if there's anything that would happen, it'll be to me, you know, consequences would be for me. But when you mess with the spiritual world,
you open that door.
The consequences go beyond ourselves. And that's when you mentioned maybe nothing was happening to your dad, but you started experiencing some crazy things.
Yeah. So again, like it was such a weird transition because my dad just randomly was like, we're going to start going to church. And I was like, who is God even? Like, you know, because for me, and that's the crazy thing about it, I knew there was a spiritual world.
Yeah, who was God to you in all of this? Because it was too
whatever. It was so separate because clearly there's a spiritual world because what we're dealing with is like dark entities and demons and all that stuff. Even if it's masking itself as something good,
else.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
And you feel it and you know that it's there and you know that it's real, but God was never mentioned, you know? Growing up, I don't remember ever hearing about God. I don't remember ever hearing about Jesus. The most Jesus I saw was again when we would go to that Catholic church and my dad and his altar had like a little vase and there was like a little cross with Jesus inside of it. That's the most like I knew about Jesus. Yeah. So for me, like I was so far away from God in that sense, but I knew that there was a spiritual world. So when we started going to church, it was like the strangest feeling. Like I felt like I didn't belong. I felt like there was just like so much distance from it. I didn't really fully believe. It's not that I didn't believe, like I was an atheist, but I felt very indifferent to it. Like I was like, I don't think this is like real. Like it's all fluffy, you know, like it's all whatever. But then that's where it started getting crazy, at least for me. My parents didn't experience it. They didn't even understand it. And it felt very isolating growing up for like that time period because it was just like, I'm the only one going through this. They're not experiencing it, but this is legitimately like terrifying. And basically what ended up happening was my dad accepted Jesus. We started going to church, but I wasn't fully like in it. I wasn't into it. Like I would go because I was like 12 or 13, but I wasn't like fully like feeling it. And I remember my dad would like go on his trips and it was just me and my mom at home. And what would end up happening was I would just feel a lot of like probably demons and like presences in our house or whatever. I remember like I'll get into the story, but I remember there was like a time where my dad was again away on his trip and I was downstairs. I think it was like the middle of summer and I was downstairs in the living room, which is where my dad predominantly was. When he was home, he was either in the living room or in his room watching TV or whatever. And I was in the living room, you know, just watching TV or whatever. And then I think I just ended up falling asleep. It was like 2 a.m. or something. And I'm falling asleep and I'm like, I'm just going to mute the TV because I didn't want to be in like total darkness or whatever. And so the TV was muted on like those infomercials or whatever. And suddenly, it was probably like 2 or 3 in the morning. Suddenly the TV goes to like that like static thing and it's like super loud. It's like probably at like, if it was at muted at 0 or whatever, it was like at 50, 90 or whatever. It was super, super loud. And that just like wakes me up and I'm like, oh my God, what the heck is happening? And that for me growing up was like one of the scariest things, like whenever the TV would go into static mode. So I was like, oh my God, I turn off the TV, but I still felt like paralyzed by fear. And so I was like, I'm just going to lay back down and pretend like this didn't happen, give myself some time, and then I'll like go up into my room. And basically like shortly after I was wearing a blanket, I start feeling something like just dragging through my legs or whatever. And I was like, nope, this isn't for me. I got to go. And I like just dropped everything and like ran up into the room. And that was probably like the first thing that I experienced. And I think I told my mom and stuff and she was like, That's crazy. But like there was never any like real like validation or like
or even
understanding.
Yeah.
And I remember they called like the pastors at the time to like come and cleanse the house and stuff. And they were like, yeah, I feel like
they pray for the house.
Yeah, pray for the house. They anointed all the doors. They like just tried to like, pray for it. And they felt like there was some like spirits of prosecution and stuff in the house, but that was it. Like nothing really went further, but I kept experiencing things up until like the end. I started seeing what was like this like shadow figure situation that would go all the way to like the top of the ceiling. And I remember it was every single night. And I was already at school at that point. I was like, guys, I can't even go to sleep. Yeah. Like I'm trying to go to school and I'm not feeling like comfortable or whatever. I remember my mom laid in my bed and she's like, I don't see anything.
How did it stop?
So basically what ended up happening was one day after school, I ended up coming home and I decided to take a nap. And this was like the worst of it. This was like, what the heck is happening? But it was my turning point. I think that's what ended up getting me closer to God. I took a nap on my bed. And again, this was like happening every single night. I would go to sleep and I see that thing hovering over me, just like literally like getting closer and closer and closer. And that day I took a nap and suddenly like I'm having like a vision of this. Like, have you seen like Stranger Things? It was Vecna's world. It was like this sandy desert, like everything's dead. There's no tree, there's no life. It's just like red. Like I see red, like almost like flames, like off in the distance and stuff. And it was just like that world. And I see this like huge shadow thing, like huge shadow figure in it. And it just grabs me by the neck and it starts suffocating me.
Wow.
And I feel myself coming in and out of consciousness. Like I'm trying to like fight it off. And I'm like falling right back in until I was able to just like completely like come off of it. And in that moment, like I remember just literally going to the corner of my room and sobbing. And that was my moment of like almost like clarity where I was like, if this is real, God is real. Like if it can get this bad and there's this much evil and something wants to hurt me spiritually this bad, then I can't keep denying that there's a God.
Yeah.
I can't keep denying that Jesus is real. And I remember sobbing for probably like a really long time. Wow. It got really deep after school.
Yeah.
But like I remember sobbing for a really long time and just like repenting to God and just like that was my moment of like feeling really close to him. And it stopped. Wow. I never experienced it again. I never saw anything. Like I still can sense.
Yeah, because I believe that that's a gift that God has given you.
Yeah.
That, like I said, can be used. God gave it to you for a reason.
Yeah.
But the enemy will take any opportunity to turn it into something else.
Yeah.
And I love what you said. If this that you experience can be so real, there's no denying that God is real.
That was like the turning point.
Yeah, and that there is a good and a bad. Like it is a reality of life. And, it makes me think back of even for me, I grew up Catholic, very much involved. I knew about Jesus. I've always loved Jesus. I've always been involved with my family, back in my hometown in church. And, I've known this now, of course, with a different understanding. But I've always known that I have a gift. And again, you do with that based on what you understand and the knowledge you have.
Yeah.
But I would be that young girl, and I remember visiting my family in New York and New Jersey, and I was that young girl that would walk into a room and immediately tell my mom, there's something here. I didn't know what, I didn't even know the extent of what I would be saying, but I even remember at one point sitting down and I would get visions of what was happening, and I would tell my mom. I remember vividly telling my Mom, there's this shadow figure that stands in this door. And when my aunt's washing dishes, it's watching her. Wow. And specific things that I didn't know. And then we ended up telling my family, and they said, yes, like that happens. And to me, it was like, okay, this is real. And because I'm, aware of these things, then I believe that things keep happening to you, trying to turn you into something like that experience into something else.
Yeah.
And pull you away from God and tell you, well, maybe there's this other thing that you should, look into.
Yeah.
And maybe it's the zodiac, maybe it's the color, whatever. And it might seem innocent at first. And I remember at some point, my mom would leave for work very, very early, 5 o'clock in the morning, 4:45, and I would be alone getting ready for school, middle school, high school. And I remember this time where my mom would leave, I'll stay asleep, and then I'm, maybe waking up, trying to get ready, and I would physically, like, in my body feel a presence coming into my room, and I would freeze. Wow. And I would freeze out of fear, and I could not move, and I would just cry until whenever it passed.
Yeah.
I told my mom told a friend of hers that was a Christian. She used to go to a Christian church and whatnot. And she said, tell Diana next time she feels that, to say I cover myself with the blood of Jesus. That meant, not nothing, but I didn't quite understand the extent of what I would be saying. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna say that. I need help. Like it would happen every single day. And I remember that one time that it happened, and I literally would just say, I cover myself with the blood of Jesus. I cover myself with the blood of Jesus. And it stopped.
Wow. And
it never happened again. And it was little tools, and now it was like, okay, so this is real. God is real. There is power. But life sometimes leads us to think that this is so powerful and there's so much I could get from this that I don't pay attention to God and the reality of God. Then now I'm involved in, and I started like you. Now I'm like intrigued by these things because now I know, okay. And at some point I'm like looking into, past lives, and there's these books I was reading, and the more I would dive into that, the more things I would experience. So don't get wrapped up into things like this, because it will, next thing you know,
and it seems small. It always starts small.
Yes,
it's always like, yep.
And it's like, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not harming people. I'm not
watching a video. I'm reading a book.
Yes. Yeah. But it's like you are opening doors to things that are bigger than what we sometimes.
And it snowballs. Always. It always snowballs. Like I like you were saying, not recently, oh my gosh. But I probably like a couple years ago, started watching like YouTube videos. Because again, it's like you were saying, like we're like open to this world and we have like this gift, and you start kind of like, okay, like I love the creepy stories and I want to hear all the creepy stories and I want to, watch the videos or whatever. And this girl came across my YouTube and I started listening to her stories. And the more I started listening to her stories, the worse that oppression started like feeling in my room. And I remember it got to a point where I couldn't even sleep. Like my husband is completely passed out next to me, like in like his 9th sleep. And I'm just like there laying in my bed, completely feeling whatever's in my room. And again, it seems innocent and it seems super small. And it started off of a YouTube video. And then I realized this is opening a door that I don't need to open, and it always seems smaller than it is until it's like this huge thing that you're like, okay, I did this. Yeah.
And I think of our world today, and I think of probably 3 different types of people. One, the person that tries to dismiss the reality of the spiritual world and say, well, no, that's fake. It's not real. There's no such thing as God and the devil or, this and that. And you can't deny the reality because we've experienced it.
Yeah. There's no denying
we are spiritual beings. God created us, as spiritual beings. We have a soul, and there is that reality. And so we can't deny that it exists.
Yeah.
And that it's very material. Then you have the person who now might be involved in these things and trusting or putting their faith into something that requires something of them.
Yeah.
It's almost like
or fear. Out of fear,
it's like you're selling your soul, but you kind of are.
Kind of.
Because it's this trading of, I have to give you this in order for you to give me this.
Or you're afraid of leaving it because you don't know what the repercussions are going to be.
Yeah, which is a scary thought. If you ever are in a relationship, think of any relationship that we could have. What kind of relationship is it a good relationship when I feel the fear that if I step out, that you're going to harm me? Like,
just, if it's not healthy,
just even that thought. And then we have, I think, Christians that you profess Jesus and you're in church on Sundays, but at the same time, you're still involved in things that because they're not named certain things, you're still breeding your, what is it called? Is it your zodiac?
Like your astrology or whatever.
or you're still, you know, putting crystals for this and that, and you're still doing this, and it's like you have to pick one because they're not the same.
And they're definitely not the same. And those are the things that are, again, like, it seems small, it's pretty, it's a little crystal, it's supposed to like clean my my energies or whatever. Yeah, but that's one little thing that you're putting that's opening a door to other things, and then it starts with one crystal, and then you're gonna have another crystal, and then suddenly your house is like full of all of these things that are overshadowing Jesus. You know, and that's where it starts getting super dangerous, and like, spiritually speaking.
And it also makes me think that even your story, as your experience with your dad, what we do is bigger than ourselves. It's not just your father's experience and I'm sure he has stories that he can share himself, but it's what he exposed you to, you know? And I think of families, and I think that we have in our church, that we have a responsibility as parents, as brothers, sisters, to live our lives in such a way that we really show Jesus to people in the reality of who Jesus is, not with these little add-ons, and that we should ask ourselves that question: am I really trusting God with my life and in every area of my life? Or am I just going to church on Sunday but still trying to pull from other things this feeling of certainty and security and peace? And it's like Jesus died so that we could have peace, so that we could have joy, so that we can live abundant lives, full lives. And we need to stop trying to go around finding and searching for these things, because it is all found in him. And
it all has repercussions, like you were saying. Like, you think that making that decision for yourself isn't going to affect anybody else, but it does. You know, like, my dad didn't know that it was affecting me. He was keeping me out of everything, but yet it was affecting me. I was already getting pulled into it. It was opening doors to my life that I didn't need, you know? And the same way, once he finally became Christian, then it all snowballed too. That was the right decision to make. And it all snowballed. I became Christian. My mom became Christian. He started pulling all the rest of our family. His mom became Christian, which was what started him in Santeria too. His sister became Christian. My grandma ended up becoming Christian. My brother. So it all snowballed into something that now our entire family, for the most part, is Christian, you know, out of making the right decision and following Jesus, and like understanding that that is the only thing we need to follow and look for.
And finding a place and finding someone who you don't have to search anymore. Like, the search is over. And it doesn't mean, I feel like sometimes people get it twisted a little bit with the thought of, okay, you come to Jesus and so life has to be great and perfect, because that's often when we look for in other things. When people search outside of God, is because you're trying to find a sense of, everything is perfect, I'm not gonna suffer, I can fix everything that's wrong. If my daughter's sick, I can fix it. If I don't have peace, I can fix it. If I need more money, I can fix it. And it's coming to this place where life might actually not be perfect, but God gives me everything that I need to navigate life, and I have fullness and I have peace in my heart and in my soul. So it's this putting ourselves aside to say it's not about me. Is that now I have to trust the God, and that's the whole premise of God, is that it's not about me. I don't get to make the decisions, but I trust in a good God that is good and that is perfect in all his ways. And so now it's not on me to work myself to gain these things, but accepting what Jesus gives me.
That's so good.
And what he died to give me for what it is.
And it's like what you were saying earlier, like, in that kind of world and for like those kind of things, everything that you do for something, it comes with a cost. You're going to lose something in return. With God and Jesus, it's completely different. Like, if you didn't get into a relationship or you lose a relationship, it's because that wasn't the right relationship for you. There's going to be something better. If you lose a house or you lose something else, it's because maybe that house had like some crazy interest rates and you were going to be financially like stuck or in debt or whatever. Like, with God, everything is right, you know? And even when it doesn't seem like it is in that moment, everything he does is for the good of our lives, you know? And it's completely different from the alternative where it's like, oh, you want this relationship, it's going to come with this. You're going to be sick with this disease, or you want that house, nothing comes at a cost with Jesus.
And it's us playing God when we try to manipulate what happens, when we try to manipulate
our outcomes.
What we gain, what we want. It's all about what we want, instead of allowing God, our creator, to just be to just be God. And there's a relief that comes with that I don't have to be the one orchestrating how my life goes, but that I just can step back and trust that there's a good God who sees beyond what I can see, and who actually ordains my steps and leads me in the right, way, in the right path, that I don't have to carry that with me. Like, I can't imagine like carrying that. Like,
and
that
I think
weight
that's
on your
what
shoulders.
it is. That's what it is. Like, I feel like a lot of it stems from selfishness, like you were saying, and a lot of it stems from not wanting to trust in anything other than ourselves. Like, we go to these like quick solutions because we don't want to believe that there's a higher authority, our God, who, like, if this isn't for me, he's not going to give it to me, because there's something better for me after, or in the plans. And it's like, through not wanting to trust him, we're falling into these little things where it's like, I can microwave this solution, or I can get this crystal and it'll like remove this person from my life, or, and that's not how it should work. Like, if we just put our faith in him and we just learn to trust in him, that's all it takes, and everything else falls into place.
And so I would say, for anyone that's watching right now, maybe they have an experience that's similar to yours, or maybe they just, were involved in something like this themselves. Maybe they're struggling with something. What would you tell that person, on how to trust God for who he is, or how to go from this side to believing and to trusting that there's something else for them?
Man, I tell them, don't do it. It's not worth it. I think, unfortunately, I had to learn it the hard way. I had to learn it through like pushing God away. Like, I pushed him away and I pushed him away until then things were like, okay, nothing's protecting you anymore. La Santeria isn't protecting you, and you're choosing not to believe in this. So you're just like open to it. Then you're going to experience all of it. And so I had to learn it a really difficult way. And I think, had I literally just believed and just given it a shot, and like put my ego aside and been like, you know what, it's not about me. Maybe this is good for me. And if it's good for me, why not pursue it? And now why not give it a chance, right? And it's as simple as that. What do you have to lose? There is nothing to lose other than like everything to gain. You gain your salvation, you gain peace, which is like literally after I finally gave in and I accepted Jesus, my life completely changed. It wasn't perfect, because life is never going to be perfect. Like you were saying, there's always like battles and there's always tribulations and there's, things that you have to face through life, but I'm not doing it alone anymore. I'm doing it with God. I'm doing it with Jesus. And that's my strength. It's that hope that I'm not alone and I have a solid foundation to stand on. I'm not doing it by myself. The waves are coming in and the storm is coming and there's a hurricane outside, but I'm going to be okay because I know that I have protection over me with Jesus, and I think that's the biggest thing, just giving into it and allowing God to work through your life and trusting fully, because you have everything to gain from it, not from the other stuff. It's not worth it.
I love that. And I just want to say to whoever's watching right now, whatever and wherever you are in the journey, there's nothing like having a relationship with Jesus. And there's nothing like trusting God and nothing else. Because there's no one that's going to love you more, look out for you more, care for you more than Jesus. And I would say that we have a responsibility to be the kind of people that stop compromising our beliefs. Maybe you're watching and you're that person that you go to church on Sundays, but Monday through Friday, you're trying to manifest something into happening. Maybe you're going to church on Sundays, but Monday through Saturday, you're far away from God. You're playing with different things. You're going into places you shouldn't be going into. You're doing things you shouldn't be going and doing. We need to stop compromising our relationship with God in our lives. So I just want to challenge you and I. It doesn't always look like another religion. It doesn't always look like this terrible thing, but are we compromising on what God tells us to do? Am I compromising on my belief? Am I compromising my time with God? Am I compromising in what I believe and what I hold truth? And so I just want to encourage us to stand just firm in the truth of Jesus and who he is, and to know that the time is now for us to stand up as women and stand for what is right and to call things for what they are. There's no more giving in into the pop culture and what Instagram says and what that influencer talks about. We are standing firm in the truth of God. And so I just want to encourage you and I to continue diving deep into our relationship with God, trusting him as our only source for life, for everything that we need, for peace, for strength, for direction, for guidance. And as we do that, I know that God will continue to work in our lives. And so I want to thank you, Danny, for joining us today, for sharing some of your story.
It was fun.
It is fun. I love talking to you about these things.
Got crazy, but we're here.
We have all kinds of stories. And so I thank you for joining us today. And we're going to continue to pray that people would just believe the reality of this world, the spiritual world, and make the right decisions. And we'll see you next time. Have an amazing day. We love you.